Thanks, Bobby Conway, for coming on to Capturing Christianity. We're going to talk about how to get apologetics into the church, right? So let's just jump right in for those of you, for those of our audience who may not know who you are. Let's just do that first.
Yeah.
Take about 60 seconds, tell them who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff.
Okay, well, first off, it's good to be with you again, Cameron. Glad to see you today, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to talk with you. Who I am, I'm just a guy that bumped into the gospel at the age of 19 years of age, and I fell in love with Jesus and wanted everybody to know about Christ, and got a call to ministry, got married. My wife and I recently empty nested, got 2 kids, 20, 18, been married 23 years, and I've been this pastor who is saved out of addiction and a lot of trials in my life. I know what it's like to struggle in a marriage. I know what it's like to struggle as a dad. I know what it's like to struggle with anxiety and depression and all this stuff. And doubt, writing Doubting Toward Faith. And at the same token, God uses this kind of stuff just to help me in thinking about how to reach people for Christ. And so I just recently resigned about a year ago from the church, and I'm serving out in Southern California at a Bible college, just doing a little bit of teaching while I'm wrapping up the PhD and taking 1-minute apologists full time.
So we're talking about how to get apologetics into the church. So what are your start a
What's it
conversation?
look like?
Yeah, what does it look like?
Well, I think one of the things that we've got to do, Cameron, is we have to let people know in the congregations that apologetics is for everybody that's a believer. And I think sometimes what can happen is there's a disconnect in the church, because what happens is they tend to think of apologetics as something that they could never strive for unless they're a professor, unless they get their PhD. And so sometimes we got to get at the definition of something by talking about what it's not. Apologetics is not simply an intellectual endeavor. We can give an apologetic in the way that our life is displayed. Our life is an apologetic. We can give an apologetic through our actions, through social justice, where people can see, wow, I believe in the credibility of this through the way that they live. And then ultimately even a defense, apologia, that's what we're doing. So we want to give a defense of the gospel. So a head, heart, hands approach is, I think, really crucial.
Tell me more about that, head, heart, hands.
Head, heart, hands. By head, heart, and hands, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes churches will focus on one to the exclusion of the other. Head would be kind of like this intellectual idea, equipping people with doctrine, helping them understand the philosophical ramifications of some of the cultural views that they're up against. Heart would be more about equipping people in their character. And then hands would be your social justice. Sometimes churches migrate toward one of those silos. But the truth of the matter is we are to be integrated in our approach. We need to have a head, heart, hands. So James Sire, a little primer on humble apologetics. Humility. We need to have a humble heart as it goes for defending the faith. People will be they're not going to care what we say if we're coming off arrogant and if we're coming off condescending. So I think that when we're pastoring, if we're not touching the head, the heart, and the hands, we're just a parachurch. We're social justice, or we might be a character formation center, or we might be into academics. But the pastor's job is to equip their flock to be able to display all of that.
Okay, so how do we get someone who's like a heart, more heart-oriented church? How do we get them to take the head part of it seriously?
Seriously.
Yeah, because I've had trouble with that myself.
Yeah, it can be challenging. I think sometimes what happens there, Cameron, is if somebody's not kind of a head person and they're more of a heart person, they might be intimidated by the life of the mind.
I think that's right.
And it could just be too that there's some caps there, like from the standpoint that maybe they're not, naturally inclined toward that. And I think what maybe those that are more of head, we don't want to intimidate people into doing apologetics. We want to say, that's great. You have a heart, and maybe I need more of a heart. But do the best you can, because here's the deal. If you're a pastor, you need to have some head, because there's some defending to be done, there's some doctrine, and the flock needs that. And we don't want to send the message that apologetics is important. The person who says apologetics is important has just revealed how little evangelism they're doing. Get out and start doing evangelism, and people got questions. And that's all we're saying, is we want people to have answers to the questions.
Yeah, so what would a conversation look like between you, say that you weren't a pastor, or you're not a pastor, and you were going to go to your pastor and try to convince them to get more involved in apologetics, maybe start like an apologetics class at your church. What would you, give me an example of what you would tell them?
Well, one thing is oftentimes a lead pastor is more of a generalist. and he's trying...
A generalist?
A generalist. So he oversees the whole, right? And so there's a vision of the whole, and you have a bunch of people with silo passions that are your specialists. And everybody who has their silo passion thinks that the lead pastor needs to be as passionate about their silo passion as they are. But the truth of the matter is that's not his job. As it's been said before, you know, a lead pastor is kind of like an air traffic controlman. And the planes in the air represent all these different ideas that people have. And his job is to say when those planes land and in what order. So people leave churches because they get frustrated. Oh, the pastor's not excited about this or not excited about that. It's not that he might not be excited about it, but he's trying to lead a whole. When do I drop this plane on the runway? When does this come into play? And so by being a visionary, people need to be gracious. But here's what I'd be asking. Do you value apologetics? And if he says no, then I would want to ask the question, well, why not? What do you think apologetics means? Because if he began to give that explanation, what he thinks it means, we're probably going to find out that he thinks apologetics is just a mind endeavor, or it's being arrogant, or it's being overly black and white. And then we can say, no, that's not what I mean by that.
Or maybe they think it's against faith, like...
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe presuppositionalism right there now, right? Maybe it's against faith. So I think that if he's for it, then we can talk about, well, what's your vision for it? Or can I help you with that?
Yeah. So how would you, so if they do answer negatively, how do you combat?
Well, I don't want to burn a bridge with an individual, but if I'm in a church that the pastor has no interest, I'm looking at the New Testament and going, man, I can see apologetics in all the books of the Bible. I mean, on some level or another.
Right.
So for me, I'm going, then we're not going to be a biblical church, because if they needed apologetics in the first century, how much more do we need it 2,000 years later in a melting pot culture of beliefs with the worldwide web that we're interacting with all these different faiths and we're bumping up against? Like, listen, we need apologetics now more than ever. And if I'm in a church that's not going to value it, then it's time for me to look for another church.
That's actually a perfect segue into another question that just popped up in my mind was, what is an example of a church that is integrating apologetics in a great way?
Well, I think Timothy Keller.
I was thinking the same thing.
Is a prime example.
Yeah.
We're doing this interview up here in New York right now, and I think Timothy Keller is a great example. I can tell you as a person who's both a trained apologist and about to wrap up my PhD in philosophy of religion and all of my pastoral years of experience. At times I felt like an oddball. When I'm with pastors, I feel like, man, we need to have more depth. When I'm with my apologists or philosopher friends, I'm going, yeah, but there's this heart component. So maybe what you're hearing from me is my training has been in all these worlds, and I'm going, I want to bring this together. And so I think Timothy Keller models beautifully an approach where he's very aware sociologically, philosophically, psychology. The church wants to make everything a moral issue. The culture wants to make everything a mental health issue. And it's not always either or. And I think some of the things that we have to be aware of. See, Cameron, we can't reach this culture the way we did in the 50s, because now the culture used to share the values with the church, right? So now the culture has legalized what became our material that the Holy Spirit used to convict people of sin. So, there was a time where the culture shared with the church that divorce is wrong, that homosexuality is wrong, that getting high is wrong, that you name it, that these different things are off. Now we have divorce parties. Now we celebrate all these different things. So now we go to share the gospel with the culture, and we start where we start right at this sense of giving them the gospel. But we have so much more thought work. So we have to create a culture of thought leaders so that we can bring them. See, think of God. He's an accommodating God. He meets us where we are to bring us to where he's at. You take Abraham and Isaac, Genesis chapter 22. Go sacrifice your son. Well, he never intended for Abraham to sacrifice his son. But Abraham came from a culture where sacrifice was normal. So right when he's about to do it, don't do it. As if to say, I'm not like the other gods. And so what he was doing is he was bringing them to where he was, but he met them where they were. And we have to go out like God, meeting the culture where they are, not jumping out and immediately giving a defense, but doing a little concessional apologetics. I can't imagine what it would be like to have same-sex attraction. I can't understand what it must feel like to be told to submit when you're in a culture of feminism and you've had these type of ideologies. So Keller, he's aware of all of that, and he equips the flock in such a way that I really feel like they can be robust in Manhattan for Christ.
Yeah, and for people who really care about apologetics, if you're watching this and you're an apologist and you're wondering how I can get apologetics into my church, I think that getting apologetics more embedded in culture more generally is going to be done through pastors. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's crucial that we get pastors to appreciate apologetics, but that's going to take you to actually go and do the work of talking to your pastor, ask them, what are your vision? What's your vision for this, and actually integrating that into church life. Otherwise, I don't think we're going to have the impact that we want to have, because apologetics, the people who are interested in this, it's very niche. It's very, very. There's a body of people who are interested in it. Yeah. But in order to get it sort of disseminated throughout Christian culture more generally, I think we have to have pastors that are interested in and engaged in apologetics.
Yeah, I think we got to network together, Cameron. I mean, you think about how did the feminism movement become part of the culture? How did the LGBTQ movement become part of the culture? They network together and they work together. Well, unfortunately, the church is terrible at working together. So what you've got is, we're splintering the church to death in the name of our pet particularities. Jesus died on one hill. And what we got to realize, we got to step back, rally around the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, and we have got to champion each other. Listen, anybody can preach to the choir. That's what I struggle with. You watch MSNBC or you watch Fox News, everybody's just preaching to the choir. If we're going to advance the conversation, we've got to listen. In the same way in the church, we've got to listen. People don't want to be a part of the church. In fact, I think sometimes people look at the church and say, you guys are saying you're offering grace, but the culture looks a lot more gracious. They'll accept me in my homosexuality. They'll accept me with my divorce. They'll accept me in this. And then we're out saying grace, grace, grace. But then we're going, we'll church discipline you if you don't hold to our standard. So now we got to think through what this is going to look like for us to model grace and carry the gospel out in this time.
So what's like a good resource for people that want to look into this further? Do you have any resources of your own that you're working on that people can look into?
Yeah, about what apologetics would look like in a local church?
Yeah.
Oh, boy, yeah. Maybe people could do a YouTube search and see, I've done a message on this before, and see if anything's there. I do think that Keller, just listening to his tone, to his sound, I think that some of the basic ideas that people can be doing is like, man, use links. Use your link, Cameron. Use our link at the 1 Minute Apologist. Imagine if every pastor would have an apologetics page that was just different links where their people could go to as a resource. I think we need to start creating small group curriculums. That's one of my passion. But it's not just scholars doing this stuff. It's getting lay people. Like, that's what I love that you're doing right now. I mean, here's a guy who's a photographer and you're doing this ministry. And we have to do conferences together. And it's not just putting professors up there where people go, well, I could never be that. Yeah. We need to be able to say, hey, Cameron Bertuzzi, he's a photographer, and look at this ministry. And I think we need to work together in doing conferences and writing together. We need to be sharing each other's stuff. And we need to help people figure out what J. Warner Wallace talks about is their X factor. Everybody has been created by God. They don't have to do and know everything. What we have to do is figure out, who am I? We're all a product of our pain, our experiences, our mentoring, the books we've read, the culture that we lived in. And all of that stuff makes us who we are. And we think about all that stuff together and we go, how would that work out for my missional niche? Because we all can be an example for Christ. And so sometimes people, if they're social justice, well, hey, get equipped in the gospel and use social justice to be a witness for Christ. If some people are passionate about mentoring, do that. There's all kinds of ways we can be defenders of the faith.